All right, so when you click on the agenda, remember it takes you to our agenda. In here, once I actually put the video into the agenda, you know, this link will turn, well, it'll turn into a link and it'll turn blue so that anytime you're missing anything, you can always come back and watch our videos. Okay. And then, of course, what we're doing in here, and Wednesday, I will be adding in the MVLA paper time assignment that we have to do as well this week. Okay. So hopefully I've been installing. You guys have been opening up your Great Wall of China DBQ, the one that we started last week. We only got through, I believe, like the background and the understanding questions. And I do believe we got through document 1, correct? Right? Okay. So now we need to go to, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. I'm going to pull the actual thing so I can make it larger for you guys. Okay. Give me a moment so that we can actually look at the documents together. Now, I sent out a remind text. I reminded you guys of this at the last class. I sent out a remind text yesterday. You guys were supposed to be working on these so that we could quickly work our way through these because there's quite a few documents. And then we need to set them into which one is pro documents and which ones are con or against documents, benefits versus costs, so that we can get all of this done. So what we're looking at, document B, is an excerpt of a letter written by Chao Ku, Imperial Secretary of the Han Dynasty. He was an advisor to several Han emperors. He was highly respected for his ideas about the military and border defense. The recommendations made in this letter were actually adopted. Okay, can you guys all see this? Do I need to make this bigger? Would that make it a little bit better? Let me see. Well, I can take it up to 150. Okay. All right. So the Shengyu live on meat and cheese, were first, possess no house or field. They move like birds and animals in the wild. They stop only at places which abound in grass and water, want of which will start them moving again. Today, the Shengyu are herding at several places and hunting along the frontier. So remember, the Shengyu, which they ended up being called also Mongols, were herders. They lived in yurts and they picked up and they moved as they went. Okay. It will be profitable to you to dispatch generals and officials together with troops to govern the frontier areas. People, slaves, convicts, and willing peasants should be selected to settle along the border areas permanently, who can set up families and grow food grains while getting prepared against possible invasion by the Shengyu. For the immigrants in such border areas, the government will construct walled cities, well protected by high walls, deep moats, catapults, and thorns. Each city along strategic points and thoroughfares will be designed to hold no fewer than 1,000 households. Each walled city will have an inner wall and an outer wall, 150 paces by 209 meters apart. Each residential area in the outer wall area will be surrounded by sandy fields to detect the intrusion of enemies in the night. Intruders will leave footprints in the soil, is what the thought process behind that was. Okay. So let's look at the questions that go along with this document. So the Chinese notion of barbarian was anyone who wasn't Chinese. Okay. What characteristics of the Shengyu made them seem barbarian to Chao Kuo? Well, they were nomads, right? They did not settle and farm like the Chinese did. Their diet was suspect, because remember, they live on meat, cheese, they wear furs, and they have no house or field. All of those things were considered, like, because those were so outside of the Chinese life, Those were suspect or wild, barbarian, right? They appear dangerous and are likely to invade. Why? Because they hunt and they're all along the border areas. Okay. So I will put that into our chat. Right, so it's in the chat for question 15. Question 16, what does Chao Kuo recommend to keep the Xiongnu from invading? He's recommending two basic things: setting up the military and relocating immigrant families to the newly built towns along the frontier. Not sure why this is showing up suddenly as bold. Oops, wait, go back. Let's see. So send the military, send immigrants to set up farms there. All right. Any questions so far? Yes, no. So we're all good. I saw some thumbs up. Yes. Yes, Angeline. I'm not going to go any slower, guys. You were told to get these completed before today's class because we have all of these documents to get through.
It was just an accident.
Yes, Angeline? You were just saying, yep, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Question 17. What do you think would be more effective in discouraging a Xiongnu invasion? Walls or a large Chinese population along the border? So my thought process, you might have a slightly different process, but my thought process is that the immigrants might like establish new routes and develop better relationships with the Xiongnu because they're right there on the border, right? So the immigrants are on the Chinese side, the Xiongnu are on the other side. And then, thank you, McKean. So that they might be able to establish like relations with them, right? Here's the deal. If you establish relations with another group, are they more likely to want to invade? Probably not. Whereas the soldiers who are along the wall are only going to be there for like a year, right? That's their service. Are they really going to establish relationships with the invaders on the other side? Probably not. So in my thought process, having all of those immigrants there would actually, in the long run, be a better defense, if you will. If you've ever heard, like there's a saying says, good walls make good neighbors. And the idea is that, you know, as neighbors, you may have a wall, you stay on your side, we stay on our side, but we're still going to work together, maybe develop trade, etc. And then eventually those relationships are going to work out. Kind of that idea. I could be wrong. Because, you know, if you pay attention to Genghis Khan and the Mongols, they invaded and, you know, took over everything. And then, you know, hello, Mulan, who is a real person. And then the idea, once Genghis Khan and the Khans swept across Asia, slightly different. And who knows, maybe they felt like that's the walls were an invitation to invade. I'm not sure. Question number 18, what benefits to building a wall are suggested by the document? So immigrant Chinese families that were moved up to the border needed protection. So if they're going to be successful in growing food for themselves and the soldiers, they needed something to safeguard their crops. The walls around the new cities would have done that and would have been worth the cost. Now, by the way, guys, if you are paying any attention to the fact that you should already have your document open and you should literally be just copying and pasting what I'm putting into the chat directly into the correct answer spot on your document. So I don't know how to make it any simpler or any faster for you. And this is something we've been doing with the journals, etc. So you guys should be able to do this. Question number 19. So it's the last question for document B. It says, what costs to building a wall are suggested by this document? So one of the question, could a wall really keep out the Shengyu? Couldn't they cross somewhere else? Because remember, they said the walls weren't like the entirety, right? It said from this to this, from this to this, from this to this. So in between those walls, right? Why couldn't the Shengyu just go in between the walls? Couldn't they have crossed somewhere else that there wasn't soldiers or a wall, right? Building a wall or many walls would require a huge investment in labor and lives, and it could possibly be a wasted effort if the Shengyu can still come across at any other area. So I'll put question number 19 in the chat, okay? All right, so question 15 starts with basically, so if you look right here, it says basically the Shengyu are nomads. That's question 15. Right beneath it, where it starts with Chow, that is question 16. Come down just after Mingking, and you see over time, and that would be question 17. Then the next one, those immigrant Chinese families, would be question 18. And then could a wall really? That's question 19. Any questions or anything that you think I should change or put differently for document B? And unfortunately, because of my technical issues, we're a little bit behind, so I'm moving as fast as I can, okay? All right, if there's no questions, I'm gonna move on to document C. So we have two things for document C. We have the tribute paid by the Han to the Shengyu Mongols, right here. So in the years 51, 49, 33, 25, 1. Remember, we go backwards when we're talking BCE. Silk thread in the caddies, silk fabric in bales. If you notice each year, they go from 8,000 bales, 9,000, 18,000, 20,000, 30,000. Each year, they are increasing the amount of tribute that the Han are paying to the Shengyu Mongols. We also see a picture right here. This picture right here, this is a section of an ancient Han wall. Okay, so you can see the picture of what the wall looked like. Remember, these are ancient walls. This is not what we think of today. That's the modern wall. These are the ancient walls. So the first question, number 20, according to the chart, who was giving what to whom? The Han were giving silk to the Shengyu, the so-called barbarians who live north of the wall. So I am putting question number 20 in the chat. Okay, between 51 BCE and 1 BCE, what happened to the amount of silk that was given? We just talked about this, right? It greatly increased. The amount of silk floss increased 5 times. That's the thread. And the number of silk bales more than tripled. We went from 80 to 30,000 bales of silk, right? That is a massive increase, okay? So question number 21 is now in the chat. Question number 22, judging from both the chart and the photo, how can you use this document to argue that building the Great Wall of China was worth the cost? So even though this wall doesn't look big or strong, it is possible that the wall served a purpose as a clear boundary between the Han and the Shangyu. And that's the good fences make good neighbors. That argument I was giving you guys earlier. I'm going to put the answer to question 22 in the chat. And then question 23. So this would be, 22 would be, how do we make this a benefit? Question 23 is, how is it a con, right? Judging from both the chart and the photo, how can you use this document to argue that building the Great Wall of China was not worth the cost? Why build walls if you have to buy out the enemy with tribute? The only explanation for the Han giving all that silk was that the walls weren't working. Looking at the wall in the photo, it doesn't look like it was ever much of a barrier. Maybe the Shangyu were able to just ride around the walls or slip in between the walled towns. So by giving them all that silk, maybe we were trying to bribe them to not invade our areas. Honestly, I see the two items for document C as more of a, this is why the wall wasn't worth it. Okay. Document D. So we're looking at Central or India, Central Asia, Rome, and then Han, China, right? The Silk Road trade. So we know going from the Han, China to everywhere else, we have silk, glazed dishware, tea, spices, pottery, jade, music, and bronze. Imports to Han. So what was going from this area, right? From this area to the Han Chinese, we have Buddhism coming from India. We have ermine fur, glassware from Rome, rhinoceros horn for medicines, irrigation system from Persia, which would be modern, that was ancient, now Iran. Grapes from Central Asia, music, melons packed in snow in lead containers. Okay. And then we have a reading. And it says the Han era began like most other periods in Chinese history with warfare. Wu Di, the sixth emperor of the Han dynasty, established peaceful relations with the nomadic Shangyu people of the north only after conquering them. But once this had been accomplished, Wu Di used the wall to aid in expanding China's influence in the world through trade with other nations. He extended the wall 300 miles to the west and added a chain of watchtowers beyond the wall's end. The wall and watchtowers followed the famed Silk Road that served as China's link to trade with the West. Wu Di assigned thousands of soldiers to the wall outposts and watchtowers to protect the merchants and caravans traveling along the trade routes. So let's look at question number 24. The most important export from Han China was silk. We know this, right? That was their big thing. According to the chart, what trade items might the Han have received in return? Ermine fur, glassware from Rome, rhinoceros horns, grapes, and melons. All of those things were things that the Han Chinese would have imported from other places, right? Okay, so question 24 is in the chat. Said, how far did the emperor, Han Emperor Wu Di extend the wall and why? So it told us he extended the wall 300 miles to the west and added a chain of watchtowers beyond the wall's end. Why did he do this? Because he wanted to expand China's influence by increasing trade with other countries. And a good way to do that was to provide additional protection along the Silk Road. You would be more apt to want to come further, like those moving from the west coming further will be like, hey, we can be protected from invaders once we hit a certain point. And for the Chinese merchants, they would go further west to meet up with those other merchants or other traders, right? Because of the protection along the Silk Road. Okay, so question number 25 is in the chat. How would you describe Wu Ji's attitude about China's relationship with the rest of the world? He was very open, welcoming, curious, economically shrewd, and definitely not fearful. The evidence is that he welcomed new ideas like Buddhism, right? He allowed these new thought processes to come into his country. Right, so question 26 is in the chat. Question 27, how can you use this document to show the benefits of building the Great Wall? During this age of peace, which the wall made possible, there was an openness to new cultures and ideas. The Chinese welcomed the chance to learn how others lived and thought, and China's economy benefited from the Silk Road and the resulting trade. So I'm going to put 27 in the chat. Now, 28. So that was our pro. What's our con? How can you use this to argue that building the Great Wall was not worth the cost? If you look closely at the list of items that are entering China on the Silk Road, you understand that most of them were luxury goods, right? And that was for the elite. You can absolutely be sure that the average peasant was not getting melons packed in ice. They were not getting ermine fur, to put around their coats. They were not getting Roman glassware. Buddhism and Persian irrigation techniques could one day influence the common Han man or woman. But the Silk Road towns and the walls that protected them were mostly state projects for the rich. So building this wall was not for the average Han Chinese person. It was for the elite, the rich. All right. Document E. So we have a list. We have soldiers. In the Qin dynasty, 300,000 men from Qin's army ordered to build and guard the wall until complete. They were forced to leave their families and villages for several years. Convict labor sent to do much of the work. According to poetry and legend, tens of thousands of soldiers died from hunger, sickness, extreme heat, or cold. No exact numbers of deaths are available. In the Han Dynasty, soldiers ordered to work on the wall for 2 to 5 years. They manned the wall at outposts in the desolate western frontier. Heavy fighting against the Shen Yu during much of the 2nd century BCE. We know of one particular campaign in 104 BCE that said 80% of the Han were casualties, which was a terrible cost. Also, a note for all soldiers, loneliness and boredom was a problem. Peasants under both Qin and Han. During the short 10-year period of Qin wall building, there was heavy use of peasant laborers who worked 7-day work weeks with little food. During the 8 months of winter, temperatures reached 20 to 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. In the Han period, peasant farm families were forced to move north and west, both to colonize the Chinese frontier and to build some 4,000 miles of earthen wall. While not as brutal as Qin conditions, life was still very hard. Many peasants and soldiers attempted to move across the border to live with the Shen Yu. How bad is it that you want to move with the enemy? So 29, it says name 2 categories of the people who worked on the Great Wall, and that is the soldiers and the peasants. So that is in the chat for 29. Number 30, according to the document, what evidence is there that conditions were harsh for Shen soldiers sent to the wall? I mean, we have 300,000 soldiers were forced to go to the wall, right? Hunger, sickness, and extreme weather were all issues that they would have faced. How do we know that? Because there wasn't peasants, there weren't farmers there. There were just soldiers, right? And we know the weather was extreme according to the document, right? It said that it could get down to 20 to 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, right? Though we don't know the exact numbers, the death rate had to have been very high. So question 30 is in the chat. Question 31, according to the document, what difficulties were faced by the Han soldiers? So we know they were forced to live in the isolated areas, the western frontier, for 2 to 5 years. We know that the 2nd century BCE was like constant military action, constant fighting with the Shangyu. And then we know for a fact that in 104 BCE, the casualty rate reached 80%. Okay, number 32, how can you use this document to show the benefits of building the Great Wall? So we don't really have much concrete detail about the human cost of wall building. So we know that I don't know why it says that, it should be, the Chen regime was known to be harsh, but the document admits we don't know how many people died along the wall. We also know the Han soldiers died in campaigns against the Shangyu, but except for the numbers in 104, we really don't know any casualty numbers. There's just not enough in this document to offset the advantages of the protected Silk Road trade. Okay, and that would have been huge for the dynasties. Question 33, how can we use this document to argue that it was not worth the cost? Well, the human cost in soldier and peasant suffering and deaths was too great. Forced separation from family, sickness, death, fighting the Shangyu, widespread famine due to the movement of peasants and soldiers to build and secure the wall was the cost. What was gained? Did it keep the Shangyu out? No, it did not. It didn't keep them out at all. And in fact, we know that a lot of them decided to move in with the Shangyu. So question 33 is in the chat. Document F. This is a Chinese poem. Let's see. A Chinese poem describing the life of the Han cavalry horseback soldier. The author and dates are unknown. We fight south of the wall. We die north of the wall. If we die unburied in the wilds, our corpses will feed the crows. The waters run deep and turbulent. The reeds grow dark and murky. The cavalry fight to the death. Their exhausted steeds pace up and down, whinnying. If the rice isn't harvested, how will you eat? Although we are willing to serve loyally, how can we live this way? You will be remembered, worthy, honest soldiers. We sally forth at dawn, but do not return at dusk. What would cause Han cavalry soldiers to die north of the wall? And well, we have the Shangyu would raid Chinese settlements south of the wall, and then they would be pursued back by the Han cavalrymen as they fled north of the wall. These pursuits and the vast steppes would often led to Han deaths from either fighting or exposure. So chasing them back across the border is how they would die in the north. Okay, question 34 is in the chat. What might explain why the rice in China is not being harvested? Part of the reason is that hundreds of thousands of Chinese peasants either volunteered or were conscripted into the army. They were not available to plant and help bring in the harvest. At times like these, famine would then be the result, right? You don't have enough people to plant, and then you don't have enough people to harvest what has been planted. Therefore, lack of food. Question 35 is in the chat. Question number 36, the soldiers themselves face starvation. So too did many peasants who were forced to move close to the walls. It's likely that the famine reached the people back home. So question 36 is in the chat. We sally forth at dawn, do not return at dusk. They ride out from base camp when the sun rises, but they die in battle against the Shangyu before the sun sets. Question 37 is in the chat. Question number 38, how can we use this poem to argue that this wall was worth the cost or not worth the cost? It took a heavy toll. It was particularly sad that young soldiers who were loyal, worthy, and honest were sacrificed for building a project that did not even keep the Mongols out. All right, so the only thing you have left to finish is tell me which documents go in benefits, and then which documents go under costs. Once you have completed that, you're going to turn this document in. It is a summative grade, And we are done for the day, guys. I know we went really fast, but I did record it, so we are good there. You can go back and look if you need to. Well, and I asked you guys to make sure you had your documents done, so this would just be us going over what you should have already had completed.